Hey there, welcome to the DFS Build NFL edition. We are getting ready to break down the 10-game main slate over at DraftKings. And if you are into NFL DFS, this is the show for you, as we'll help walk you through all the best options that should go in your lineups for Week 5. I'm Kevin Roberts, joined with Taylor Smith, and we're going to get right into it. If we help in any way, please give this video a like and also subscribe to the channel. We'll be going position by position, looking at ownership and projections and matchups, and pointing out the plays we like the most. All right, Taylor. So up top, Josh Allen leads everybody with a 23.27 fantasy point projection, and he's really not getting that much ownership despite the matchup with the Texans being pretty favorable. Are you thinking about going all the way up top this week, or are you thinking going more mid-range or punting quarterback?
Yeah, I'm not getting a lot of the 7K and over guys. Allen, Stroud, Lamar. Kind of a dusting of them. Obviously, they project well every week, but I think I'm saving money more at QB. There are good spots among the cheaper guys that we'll get to in the West Coast games in particular. But yeah, I think I'm paying down and getting just a little bit of the top guys, but largely fading them.
Yeah, I mean, right away, Brock Purdy and Jordan Love stand out just because they're like $1,000 or more cheaper than Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and CJ Stroud, and they both have very favorable matchups. Brock Purdy is obviously the cheapest of those top projecting guys. Within the top 5 projecting guys, he is only 6.2K. That's quite a bit less than everybody else. He's going up against the Arizona Cardinals, who are 4th worst against fantasy quarterbacks, and Jordan Love is going up against the Rams, who are 5th worst. So these defenses have given up some pretty massive games to quarterbacks, and these guys are good and have solid weapons around them in general. So starting with those two, how are you feeling about those guys? And is one a priority over the other for you?
It looks like Purdy's the one I have the most of. It seems to be a weekly thing. Great weapons, of course, with Kittle and Debo back. Still no C-Mac, so the stack itself is more affordable that way. Great matchup against Arizona. We saw them get gashed last week by Washington. San Francisco, in theory, is a better offense, and he's still only 6,200. So Purdy looks great to me. Getting a bit of Jaden Daniels, too, against Cleveland, just because of the two-way upside, of course. They've been phenomenal. I don't know if they're actually this phenomenal, but hard to argue with the results. Rushing upside, you can argue he's still underpriced. 6,800 for what he's done is pretty impressive, or pretty interesting, rather. He's been impressive. I think Jordan Love is a good play. It's that semi-indoor game at SoFi. Rams defense, probably not what it used to be with Aaron Donald. The only issue I have with Jordan Love is his weapons. There are quite a few of them. It's kind of hard to pinpoint one that you love over the others. Jaden Reed's kind of been the guy when he's been in the lineup, but they do still have quite a few other options. So stacking with Love is where it gets complicated for me.
Yeah, but in tournaments, that's also where you could kind of leverage because it looks like Jaden Reed's going to carry ownership and Dontavian Wicks. So honestly, Romeo Doubs is a pretty appealing GPP play, just pivoting off of those guys. But I have no problem with just eating the chalk there too. Love himself is coming in as pretty chalky. I think he's like the 3rd highest owned quarterback on the slate. So for that reason, I do see Purdy being an appealing pivot. But I like Love a lot. It's a really good matchup. He crushed last week. Obviously, he had to throw a lot. But 34 fantasy points is 34 fantasy points, and he did that despite throwing 3 picks. In week 1, he had 17 fantasy points despite not attempting 1 rush and throwing a pick. So he has a pretty good floor, and he has a pretty massive ceiling. So everything across the board checks out for him. Of the top 5 guys here in terms of projection, he's my favorite. So I like Purdy as a pivot, and if you want to go pay up for all those guys, I think that's fine. Like Josh Allen, it seems like he takes every week off. He goes 30, then under 10, then 30, then under 10. So maybe he'll go back to 30 this week. Who knows? I just don't think you need to do that. I don't think you need to go spend 8K, almost 8K on your quarterback when Jordan Love and Brock Purdy are coming in with a very similar projection. So the only issue for me with Love is the ownership angle. And then if you want to, not be concerned with the stacking issue that you presented, I would just look for, ways to get different. But we'll talk more about those guys in a little bit. Moving down at quarterback, just sticking with the good projections here. You mentioned Jaden Daniels. Tyler Huntley. I don't think so, buddy. We have Trevor Lawrence at 5.7K. He's probably the next guy that stands out. Now, we've been wanting Trevor Lawrence to be that dude, but so far it just hasn't happened. Last week he projected extremely well and looked like one of the best plays, but it didn't really materialize. He had only 14.7 fantasy points. He has not topped that mark all year long. The good news is The Colts are not good against quarterbacks. They rank third worst in terms of fantasy points allowed per game to the position, and he might get tight end Evan Ingram back. So I'm willing to be overexposed here. He's not even coming in at 5% ownership. If Trevor Lawrence is once again going to get ignored by the field, I think at 5.7K, all the things considered, he has a real shot at getting 20 plus fantasy points here and helping you get exactly what you want. I'm not interested in Huntley. As far as punts, if we want to go down further and hang around Trevor Lawrence and do something different, I think the other guy that stands out a lot for me is going to be Anthony Richardson. Obviously, he's not fully healthy at the moment, and it's not even clear if he's going to play. But if he does play, like, where's his projection? It's kind of, I wonder if it's low because, well, he's been bad. There's no denying that. However, here's the deal. The Jaguars have been as bad as about anybody, dead last against fantasy quarterbacks through 4 weeks. And Anthony Richardson does have a massive ceiling, 27 fantasy points in week 1. So while the floor is brutally low and he's not completely 100%, I love him at 6K. I think it's a risk worth taking. The only issue with him, he's super chalky. He's chalky balls. He's the highest owned quarterback on the slate right now. So what are your thoughts on Anthony Richardson? And by the way, if he doesn't play, 5.5K Joe Flacco, who says no?
That's news to me that he's the highest owned QB on the slate because I have 0 of him, and I'm fine with that. I'm always fine fading a guy like that as chalk. I understand there's the rush upside, but he simply can't throw, so that's something worth noting. And I'm happy to be underweight.
Oh, he can throw, just not accurately.
He can throw. He's just not getting it to the people he wants to get it to.
It's true, but when he does, it looks pretty. It looks pretty when he does.
You don't get fantasy points for it looking pretty, sadly.
Well, you do if it's a 60-yard touchdown.
Anyway, I'm fading him. The guy that I'm getting to more in that range is Geno. Once again, just like every week.
Yeah.
Great weapons, of course. He's under 6K still. He's legitimately good. They're facing the Giants as home favorites. 25 implied team total. Just a good spot all around. I like Geno quite a bit. On the other side of that game, I think Daniel Jones is playable if Malik Neighbors is going to play in particular. He's only 5'2". Seattle defense, not great. They're underdogs. He has rushing upside. If Nate play, I like seeing him quite a bit at a cheap play. Others in that range I'm looking at, I do have a dusting of Lawrence. I don't love it. I don't want to have that, but I think he's okay. Caleb Williams, decent matchup against Carolina. I'm willing to go back to the well with him a little bit.
Caleb freaking Williams.
I have much more Geno and much more Danny Dimes. And then I have a little bit of Deshaun Watson because the matchup against Washington is elite and their defense. They played pretty well last week against Arizona, but not good in general. You can throw on them. You've been able to throw on them for years. I don't know if Deshaun Watson can throw on them because he, like Anthony Richardson, is not a good player, but he's 5'3", and I think he's okay.
You might be surprised to learn this, but I agree with everything you've just said. I'm not as high on Geno as you are, but he's definitely in play. That offense is pretty underrated, pretty darn good. I will also note I like the Danny Dimes call, not because I trust Daniel Jones, but because, based off our conversation and going into Monday Night Football, matchups, fuck them. Ignore matchups, because I was like, I don't really feel about Jared Goff because Seattle's defense has been pretty good against the pass. Well, they hadn't faced anybody, as you pointed out. So then they do, and Jared Goff catches a touchdown and throws a 70-yard touchdown. And
I didn't have that on. I didn't expect him to receive a touchdown.
Well, the point is, I'm not really that scared of the Seattle defense at this point. So Daniel Jones at 5.2, I am 100% in agreement. It is hinging on Malik Neighbors' status, though, because I have a lot of interest in Neighbors, and we'll get to that at 7.3K. But if Neighbors isn't in, what's Danny Dimes going to do? I don't know. So
the thing is, it's easy. Because he funnels all of his targets to Neighbors and Wandale. He is not throwing anyone else. It's those two guys, and that's it. And that's a very easy stack to put together. And it's pretty cheap with Jones at only 5.2.
Yeah, I haven't checked the ownership on the receivers either. I believe Neighbors, if he's in, he's projecting to be like 20 to 5% owned. Yeah,
I mean, the target share is
though.
39%, so I would expect him to be popular, but I'm happy to play him too.
So the other thing is, I really like Deshaun Watson. And by the way, I touted Caleb Williams last week. Really, really liked him. He was in a smash spot, and of course he let me down. So now that I'm not really on him, He's going to go off for sure. But here's the thing. The Panthers are really bad against quarterbacks on the year, bottom 10. So it is a really good matchup. It's just like every week they're just giving up a ton of points and getting in. Now that Andy Dalton's there, they're just getting in just straight up shootouts all the time now. So I don't recency bias. It's a hell of a drug because I don't really want to play Caleb after last week. He got like 11 points, but he's in a very good spot and remains cheap. Anyways, back to Deshaun Watson, and then we can wrap up the quarterback position here. Hey, the matchup is the matchup, man. Commanders on the year have given up 10 passing touchdowns. It's the most in the league, and they've intercepted 0 passes. They haven't really given up any production to mobile quarterbacks or anything, and they're not giving up like massive yardage compared to the other bad secondaries. It's still 933 yards in 4 games is still quite a bit. Anyways, he projects well. He's 5.3K, and people won't know it by looking at the box score. But Deshaun Watson played pretty well last game. He had a clutch throw. No, I know what you're thinking. No, he didn't. But he actually kind of did. He had a clutch throw to Amari Cooper who bopped it in the air and it got intercepted. And that basically ended that game. I mean, Deshaun Watson is not the best human being in the world. But even with like struggles with like turnovers, he had like in week 3, he had 2 fumbles lost and still had 18 fantasy points. Last week, he threw a pick and still had 13 fantasy points. I mean, he's been like right on the brink of like a big game because we know he's a mobile guy with weapons around him. So I like him. I like Deshaun Watson here this week. All right. Anybody else to claim at quarterback, or should we move along?
That's probably it. I didn't mention Burrow, but with those weapons, you can always play him. He's just kind of overpriced. No rushing upside. Not a great matchup, but you can play Burrow always in a tournament.
Yeah, for sure. Especially if you're going to play 8K Jamar Chase. If Chase is going to get there, reasonable expectation that Burrow will have a pretty good game. All right, moving on to running back. Up top is Kyren Williams. He is one of the most expensive backs. Oh, let me get off quarterback. Is he the most expensive? Nope. He's just behind Derrick Henry and possibly the corpse of Jonathan Taylor. Whether or not he plays, we don't know. But Kyren looks great. The Packers' run defense has looked okay against the Titans, which means nothing. And then against the Vikings, where the Aaron Jones wasn't really needed that much. So Aaron Jones still had a pretty good game, by the way. So I don't fear their defense whatsoever. They've given up major games to Saquon Barkley and Jonathan Taylor on the ground. Kyren Williams has not been efficient on the year, but last week he did run for 4.9 yards per carry, which is pretty good. And he's had 20 plus fantasy points in back-to-back weeks. The reality is, you can talk about his efficiency all you want. The role is massive. The matchup is pretty good. The only downside here is that he's going to be about 25% owned. Are you paying for Kyren? And if not, who is the top guy for you at RB?
He's the top guy, kind of the co-top guy with Jordan Mason. Kyren projects better. The matchup's better, I think. The matchup's better for Mason, but Kyron's just, the workload's insane. He's playing 90% of the snaps every week. He's getting pretty much all the rushing. He's catching some passes out of the backfield. Good game environment against Green Bay. Should be competitive. No qualms with him at all. I would be playing him a lot. Ditto with Mason. I'm kind of paying up for both of them in a lot of lineups, saving money elsewhere.
Same.
We'll see about the Trey Sermon thing. He's 5'7", so he's not even a punch.
Yeah, he's not even that cheap. Dude, that feels like bad chalk, right? It's just bad chalk waiting to happen.
Who else do they have? Like if Taylor's out, Richardson.
Well, who says that if JT is out, number one, Anthony Richardson doesn't just run a ton more, or Tyler Goodson doesn't just share the load with them?
I mean, Trey Sermon got decent work last week. I guess Taylor left pretty late in the game, but based on the salary,
5 carries, 8 yards.
I mean, not good work, but
obviously he's in play if
he's the
JT
starter
is
if
out.
Taylor's out, and I think that alone puts him in play.
Sure, for sure, I agree. But he's not cheap. Like he's not super cheap.
There's not really a lot else at cheap running back that I feel good about, which is why I'm paying up for Williams and Mason for the most part. I don't feel good about Chuba Hubbard necessarily. I feel like it's kind of a chase after what he's done the last couple of weeks.
No, look at that roll though. Look at that roll.
I'm willing to go under on Chuba at 6-1.
22 plus touches in back-to-back games, 25 plus fantasy points in back-to-back games.
That's
I'm in on Hubbard at 6.1K. I'm not saying he's not without risk, and the Bears are a pretty good defensive team, but 6.1K for a do-it-all back who's getting loads and loads of touches here. We disagree there, my friend.
That's fine. I'm happy to go under on Chuba Hubbard and pretty much anyone that ever plays for Carolina. So
That's fair.
I don't think it's a bad play, especially if Sermon is chalk in the same range, but I'm getting more of Sermon as of now. I guess he's projected to be the starter based on what I'm looking at. There is one cheap guy that kind of pops a little bit for me at 5'2". Javonte Williams against the Raiders. I think it's a matchup thing. Don't really want to play Denver in general. The offense is atrocious, but I assume if they're going to do anything, they will do it on the ground. And Javonte, in theory, is a big play threat, and 5'2" is just really cheap for him. So I'm willing to go to him a little bit. Ramondre is in some lineups. Don't feel good about that since they've talked about benching him. I think Brian Robinson is an okay kind of mid-range play at 6'6", based on the volume he's gotten so far with Eckler out. Is he still out?
It's questionable for sure. Let's see. Questionable.
Yeah, well,
he practiced. It's only a concussion too, so I would imagine he's back. Which, by the way, would take everyone off of Jeremy McNichols.
And I think Josh Jacobs is interesting. They didn't run last week. They fell down 28-0, I think, but
he ran well though.
It's pretty cheap. He's been running well all year, and the matchup, like we said, against the Rams is not imposing. If the passing game is going to be popular for Green Bay, I kind of like Jacobs as leverage.
100%. The funny thing is, especially at running back, for some reason, just like anybody you feel good about is going to carry ownership, but I just don't. You can't really worry about that sometimes. Jacobs is one of those situations. He's under 20%. It's not like mega chalk or anything. I love Josh Jacobs. I think you can play him and Kyron together if you want. Obviously, he is a pretty good leverage on Kyron because he's in the same game, and maybe he and the Packers dominate possession. But I think more than anything, Jacobs would be a like you said, a leverage on the Packers passing game, which looks to be pretty chalky, just because the value they offer and they're looking good in this matchup. Any interest in your boy Kenneth Walker after scoring 3 touchdowns last week?
A little bit. I'm more on the passing game for them, but obviously the touchdown equity is there. I'm not really getting there right now, but it is Thursday afternoon, so we'll see.
That's true. And by the way, I'm 100% with you on Jordan Mason too. Right now, my 2 backs in there, I'm paying up for the top 2 projecting guys. I'm paying up for Jordan Mason and Kyron Williams. I don't really care if they're chalky. The only time I care about chalk is if there is a very, very good pivot that is way less owned, or that chalk looks really bad. Like if Trey Sermon was 40% owned, I would be like, I don't know if I really want to pay for 40%, 5.7K Trey Sermon. But Kyron Williams and Jordan Mason carrying monster ownership, their roles are huge and their matchups are awesome. Arizona is really bad against running backs, bottom 4. So yeah, I'm with you. I'm okay with making some of those pivots if we want to. I think if I had to choose one, it would be Josh Jacobs. And then I just do like the value with Hubbard at 6.1K. But I agree though, if I'm going to do that, it would probably be a leverage against the Trey Sermon ownership in that same price range. Like I'm not really currently eager to play Hubbard. I don't want to get it, misconstrued. My favorite running backs, it's paying up for me.
Sounds good.
All right. So wide receiver we go then. Malik Neighbors leads the way with a 20-point fantasy projection, but his head is bumping, so we don't even know if he's going to play. He exited last week's game with a concussion. He still is. Has he been practicing at all? No. He probably should get a practice in today if he's going to play. Let me just check and see if
he did not practice today.
Okay, so that doesn't sound great. So if he's out, obviously, like I said, not into Danny Dimes if he's out. I think you could still look at Wan'Dale Robinson just because they don't have anybody else, and you can consider Giants punts. But it's just messy. I don't really want to get into that really. If Neighbors plays at 7.3K, he remains too cheap. When you compare him to somebody like Jamar Chase, who's 8K flat, it's just a massive discount. So if he carries ownership, I don't really care. I think at 7.3, if he's active, that looks really good. Jamar Chase and Nico Collins are interesting because, Jamar Chase specifically because his price and matchup are going to make him a little bit low owned. So if he's under 10% ownership, I do have interest in Jamar Chase. The Ravens aren't like the hardest matchup, but I think after seeing what they did to the Bills last week, people are going to be a little bit scared, or they just look at cheaper guys like Malik and Nico, and want to go that route. So anyways, up top, when we're talking about expensive wide receivers, who are you prioritizing today or this week? not today.
I do like all three of them. I think Neighbors would be the one, if he's in, that I would probably have the most. Even if he's out, I do think you can skinny stack Jones with Wandale. I don't have high hopes for that, but just because they're affordable. I like the Nico Collins thing. I like Jamar Chase. I'm totally fine with them. Debo looks great. I mentioned loving Purdy. Debo's only 6,800. Going to do the Brandon Ayuk thing again this week, sadly.
Yeah.
6,300. At
Dude,
some
he's
point, he
got
has to
it.
do something.
He's too good to not do something eventually. I know that's such a noisy thing to say, but dude, he's
You would
done
think.
dick all year. He hasn't top 10 fantasy points yet. He's going to blow up eventually, and this looks like a good spot to have it happen.
Yeah, and then the Seahawks, of course, DK, JSN, to a lesser extent, Tyler Lockett, but those are the guys that Gino's throwing to pretty much every time he drops back. I'll be playing a lot of Gino. Naturally, I'll be playing them with him. On the cheaper side, Deontay, still a good price, 6,100 with Andy Dalton in there getting a ton of targets. Adam Thielen's obviously dead, so he should be the number one guy for a while. The player I have the most exposure to at wide receiver right now is $4,600 Jordan Whittington for the Rams.
But that feels good.
Bay. 8 targets last week. These other guys, Tutu Atwell, Demarcus Robinson, Tyler Johnson, haven't really stepped up. Jordan Whittington is kind of playing a bigger role of late. He's cheap. I like the game in general. If you're stacking the Packers, obviously you can run it back with Whittington as a cheapie on the other side. I'm not really getting to Stafford, so Whittington's kind of just a one-off there. And then, of course, Deshaun Watson, you can't just really play him naked, so I'm playing him with Amari Cooper for the most part.
Yeah,
and a bit of Jerry Jeudy at 5-2.
Yeah, Jerry Jeudy, he's okay. I don't have a problem with that, but I love Amari Cooper this week. I mean, this dude is just all about spike weeks. He's had one game over even 8 fantasy points on the year, and he went for 27.6. That's just what he does. He does nothing or he does everything for this offense. So this is just, it's the mother of all smash spots. Obviously, we said the Commanders are terrible against quarterbacks, so naturally they are dead last against wide receivers. So that should shock nobody. I like the Browns a lot. I mean, maybe that's my death sentence in week 5, but I love Amari Cooper. He's the top one for me. I'm pairing him up with Deshaun Watson right now in the lineup that I'm kind of editing. And just because Malik Neighbors isn't practicing yet, I'm kind of just currently in real time pivoting off of him to Jamar Chase for the moment. I'm okay with Whittington at 4.6. I just feel like that is a pretty volatile situation, whereas you never know which Rams guy is going to go off. You got Whittington, you have Demarcus Robinson, you have Tutu Atwell, and then you have Tyler Johnson. They have 4 guys coming in and subbing for Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. So, I mean, literally this next game, Whittington could have like 3 catches on 4 targets and just not be a factor. So I don't want to really go there very much personally, especially when there are other pivots. Like obviously Dontavian Wicks, 13 targets last week, 2 touchdowns, no Christian Watson for Green Bay. I don't really mind that he's going to be a little bit owned. It's not that bad, is it? What's his ownership at? Don't see my boy.
I think he's a good play just because he's 5K flat.
Yeah, exactly. Very cheap, massive role right now with Watson out. Really good matchup against the Rams. You can stack him with Love or keep him by himself. I did mention earlier, I do like Romeo Doubs as well. I don't know what his price is offhand. 5.4K. So he is a pretty good pivot off of nope, that's not right. Off of Dontavian Wicks, because he's not going to be owned at all. And Dontavian Wicks and Jaden Reed are both carrying ownership. So I do like him for tournaments. Another guy, Trey Tucker. Hey, he's getting it done. 2 weeks in a row, 16 plus fantasy points. No Devontae Adams. I would imagine Patrick Surtain is going to lock up Jacoby Myers on one side of the field. So just out of necessity, Trey Tucker is probably going to get a lot of catches, at least a lot of targets coming his way. So I think at 4.1K, he's way too cheap on this slate. Just trying to look and see. I mean, honestly, there's a lot of interesting mid-range guys in general. We mentioned Ayuk and Jaden Reed. Deontay Johnson, and by the way, T. Higgins as well. Michael Pittman, if you want to play Anthony Richardson, that could complete that stack. Brian Thomas Jr. is busting out in front of our eyes. He had like 9 targets last week, 9 targets the week before, 21 fantasy points last week. So he's coming alive. The other guy I wanted to mention, well, how do you feel about Stephon Diggs in the revenge game? You think he's going to pop off here? 6.9K.
Probably not, just because he's the wide receiver 2 on his own team, but I think he's a fine play. He's just kind of overpriced for the volume. Like, the volume goes to Collins. Stephon Diggs is pretty touchdown dependent, but perfectly fine with it if you want to stack Houston or just play him as a run back. It's not a revenge thing. It's just that he's pretty good and he's somewhat involved, but I have far more interest in Nico in that team.
Yeah, and Nico's not even carrying that much ownership either. It's pretty crazy. I will say personally, I'm like probably souring on Deontay Johnson a little bit this week just because the Bears are a pretty good defensive team. I can see it being a slower, uglier game because that's just how Chicago has been playing if they can all year long. So would not be shocked if Andy Dalton struggled here on the road and Deontay Johnson, felt it as well. I think that covers wide receiver pretty well. You mentioned Wan'Dale Robinson at 5.6K. Yeah, I think there's nobody else really that is. Are there any punts that like really stand out?
No, Trey Tucker, maybe. That's it.
Yeah, Trey Tucker is probably my favorite one at 4.1K. Well, I mean, the
And
Giants
Whittington,
guys
he's a
could be a
punt.
little bit interesting if neighbor. Oh, Wan'Dale Robinson's also questionable, by the way. He's a heel issue.
He's always questionable. He's always hurt.
Okay, but I'm just saying, if both of those dudes are out, we can entertain Giants punts for sure. All right, to tight end, the cesspool position we go. It's pretty gross. Brock Bowers leads the way with the best projection, and yet he's not going to carry any ownership because the Broncos have been really just stifling offenses lately. And then right behind was Trey McBride, who's a little bit more expensive, also not carrying ownership because he has another tough matchup against the 49ers and is coming off a concussion. So you also have George Kittle, who's fourth in line with projection. How are you feeling about tight end? You want to pay up or you want to punt it?
I don't think I buy that Kittle ownership. Like, there's just no reason he should be 3% owned against the Cardinals at a horrible position like this. I think he's the best play. I think he's the one I'll have the most of. I don't care about ownership, honestly, at tight end. Like, you need points, and it's hard to get points at tight end. So I think paying up for Kittle is what I want to do if I'm spending up. I don't mind Dalton Kincaid either it looks like he's somewhat chalky, which I don't love. But again, he should be somewhat involved in theory. I like the game in general. Houston, Buffalo. He's one of the cheaper pieces you can get to there on either side. Cheap tight ends on my radar would be the Rams, Packers ones, Tucker Kraft, and Colby Parkinson. Kraft seems to be the guy over Luke Musgrave these days. Colby Parkinson, quite a few targets last week. I think he had 7. They spread it around, but he's cheap and should be on the field, which is all you can ask for.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to go with one of these, more expensive tight ends if whoever you feel the best about. Dalton Kincaid is tough because the Bills just spread the ball around like crazy. As far as punts, I'm with you on Tucker Kraft for sure. Like him a lot. 3.5K that's a low risk play in a very positive matchup. The Rams are bottom 10 against tight ends on the year, and obviously he's just out there most of the time, which they are correctly rolling with him over Musgrave because Musgrave is athletic, but that's about it for the positives on him. The guy I'm most interested in up top is going to be Trey McBride, though. Coming off the concussion, I think his ownership is going to stay low. He's also the most expensive tight end, and the 49ers, are historically a good defensive. So people are going to think it's not an easy matchup. But here's the deal. They're going to be playing from behind in this game. So I don't really care about the matchup. Trey McBride is going to get targeted. It's him and Marvin Harrison Jr. are going to soak up most of the target share for the Arizona offense. So if he's not going to be owned, he really probably is the best ceiling of all the tight ends on the slate. So I have a lot of interest in him for sure. I will be interested to see where the ownership lies, though, because Evan Ingram is carrying 10% ownership, which makes him the third highest owned tight end. I will know Indy is very bad against tight ends on the year. They are third worst. But it's his first game back from a hammy issue. I don't know if I really trust him. I mean, 4.6 is a good price for a PPR god. What do you have, like a crazy amount of catches last year, like 114 or maybe even more? It was crazy. And he's in a smash spot, but I don't know if I want to eat chalky Evan Ingram on his first game back. All right, so let's take a quick look at defense.
Price, but I'm not really into that either.
Yeah. So. Yeah, it is a good price, no doubt about it. All right, so defense, obviously we say every week it is a bit of a crapshoot, but is there any defense that you feel better about than most?
I don't mind Denver sub 3K against the Raiders. Likely no Devontae Adams. Gardner Minshew's not the guy. They can't run the ball. Denver's been good on defense also for some reason. So I think they're a pretty good play. I don't mind punting with Carolina against Caleb Williams. He will throw some picks, it seems. If you're spending up, I think I'm going to do it with Seattle just because there's a chance New York doesn't have Wandale or Neighbors. They might, and Devin Singletary is also banged up, I think. So they might just have a skeleton crew on offense, and it's Daniel Jones to begin with. So not a bad play there, but again, just kind of play whoever fit. I don't have a lot of conviction with it.
Yeah, I think right now it's probably Broncos or bust for me. They're going to be one of the top 3 chalky defenses, but they're not expensive enough for who they've been. They haven't given up more than 13 points in any of their last 3 games. They've had 2+ sacks in every game on the year. And they've had 10+ fantasy points in 3 of the 4 games. So they've just been really rock solid, and they're going to play ball control offense to protect their rookie quarterback. So as long as they do that somewhat effectively, it's going to be a low scoring game, and Denver's defense is going to benefit from it. As far as normally for defense, I do not like to pay up for the would-be lock defense because obviously you're investing a lot of money into a volatile thing in general, but then also it always goes wrong. So I don't really like doing that. So I prefer to punt. I think at 2.9, that basically is a punt in my opinion when you have a defense that's stable. But I'm with you. I don't mind going even deeper with the Panthers or even the Giants or the Rams. And the main reason behind that is twofold. You save money, and also you are leveraging immediately with a low-owned defense against offenses that people are getting a lot of exposure to. So while I think my Packers are going to do well against the Rams, I would have a little bit of exposure to the Rams defense because they are at home, and the Packers have not been without struggles in general. I mean, Love did throw 3 picks last week, so there's that. And then, like you said, Panthers against Caleb Williams. And then, if Seattle's going to be popular in offense, the Giants, who do have an underrated defense, look kind of interesting at 2.4K. They had 8 sacks in week 3, 5 sacks in week 2. So while they're giving up some points, they're not getting absolutely demolished. They have not given up more than 22 points in a single game on the year, and they do have a good pass rush. So I think they're kind of interesting as well. All right, so that is going to do it for us. Pretty close to signing off here. If you had to do one flag plant for the week, who would you leave everybody with that they absolutely have to have in their lineups?
I would say it's probably Kyren Williams.
Yeah, I'm pretty close to going there too. I think mine is going to be Jordan Mason. That is just, he's going to be 30% owned for the 4th week in a row, it seems. But that is just really, really good chalk. I do not mind eating that chalk at all. And for me, I'm going to go pretty contrarian as far as stack. I mean, I don't know how contrarian it's going to be with the Browns offense. Is Cooper pulling ownership? A little bit, but Deshaun probably won't. So I'm going to stack the Browns. Might end up running it back with the Commander. Don't think you have to do that every time. And then we touched on some nice values like Kraft, Trey Tucker, Dontavian Wicks. I will have a lot of interest in those guys as well. All right, so that does it for us. Hopefully this helped you out. If it did, give this video a like and also consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching and good luck.